Sega Saturn is the newest and most indulgent taste temptation.
Oh, hi. I'm Mike D. Take a trip with me as we cross the hazy intersection where nostalgia and price inflation meet as we take a look at 5 consoles: the Atari 7800, the Super Nintendo, the Sega Saturn, the original Xbox, and the PlayStation 3, as we discuss not only these consoles but what the era looked like back when they were released in North America, and discover what they would cost if they came out today. So let's jump on in. The year was 1986. Dionne Warwick and Friends were #1 on the charts, and Top Gun was top at the box office. It was the year that saw the debut of the Oprah Winfrey Show, Pee-wee's Playhouse, and the Atari 7800. Well, sort of for that last one. Atari's third-generation console had originally been introduced in 1984, but due to a lack of demand from retailers following the video game crash of 1983, it was released initially only in limited test markets, and after Atari was acquired by Jack Tramiel in July 1984, this release was halted altogether as licensing disputes were being sorted out and Atari underwent corporate restructuring. The Atari 7800's custom Atari Sally 6502 CPU was able to support resolutions up to 320 by 240 pixels and a 256 color palette. The system also had the bonus of being able to support backwards compatibility for games from the Atari 2600.
The 7800 plays all the 2600 games.
The original price tag for the system in 1984 was $140 or $438.85 today. However, when it was released in 1986, the price was ultimately set at $79.95 or $237.96 in today's money. Unfortunately for the Atari 7800, having been postponed until 1986 meant that it was competing with Nintendo's Famicom, which also introduced to the North American market that year as the Nintendo Entertainment System. And whereas the NES was a runaway hit, selling 1 million units in 1986, the Atari 7800 couldn't keep pace with it, selling approximately 10% of the same amount of units in the same amount of time.
As a consumer, I like the 7800 because most games cost under $20.
The Atari 7800 was never able to live up to the success of the 2600 or compete with the NES, and Atari would eventually discontinue the 7800 in 1992 as it moved on to the Jaguar. Fast forwarding to 1991, a year that witnessed the return of Star Trek to the theaters, a return for Pee Wee Herman to the spotlight,
more trouble tonight for Pee Wee,
and the return of Nintendo to the home console market.
When you decide to get serious, there's only one place to come: the games of Super Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
In the same year that Bryan Adams was letting everyone know that everything he does it for you, Nintendo entered the 16-bit home console market in North America. In Japan, the system had been released a year prior as the Super Famicom, and it had already outperformed its rivals there. However, in North America, Nintendo's new console would be facing stiff competition from the Sega Genesis. Where Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic, and with a tagline like
Free. What Nintendo?
Sega was out to show that they were up for the fight, literally, with their games having the reputation for blood and gore, and the Super Nintendo having a reputation for being more family-friendly. And, despite having to engage in what would be remembered as one of the most fierce console wars to date, and the Super Nintendo having a price tag of $10 more at launch, coming in at $199 or approximately $472 today, Nintendo would ultimately come out on top, selling approximately 49 million units compared to Sega's console, which sold 35.25 million. This was in no small part due to games like Super Mario World and Donkey Kong Country, along with the support of third-party developers like Capcom and Squaresoft that helped Nintendo to continue to be out in front in the home console market. Nintendo would follow up the Super Nintendo with the Nintendo 64, and they officially discontinued the Super Nintendo in North America in 1999. 1995 saw Coolio atop the music charts, the UPN network, and likewise another Star Trek show hit the airlanes, and Sega hit the retail shelves again with a brand new console, the Sega Saturn.
Introducing Sega Saturn. Aww, hit it!
While Toy Story was #1 at the box office in 1995, Other movies with tons of hype behind them floundered. Likewise, one console would sink and another would swim that year. If Sega had duked out the 4th generation console wars with Nintendo, the 5th generation console wars would see them square off against Sony. The Sega Saturn, named so as it was Sega's 6th console and Saturn is the 6th planet from the sun, came with great promise behind it. It was touted for having an impressive 2 CPUs and
Monster torque and parallel processing power.
However, the system was complicated and it was difficult for third-party developers to code for, whereas their competitor, Sony, had better development tools and a more appealing licensing fee for third-party developers. Moreover, at the first E3 in 1995, when Sega announced the price of the Saturn at launch would be $399 or $849.70 in today's money, they weren't quite ready for the gut punch when Sony announced that their console would be released with a price tag that was $100 less. To combat this, Sega would launch their system early to a limited number of retailers, which only ended up compounding their problems as retailers they left out of that limited release, such as Walmart, KB Toys, and Best Buy, would later go on to carry the PlayStation but refuse to carry the Saturn. And by the end of 1995, Sony's PlayStation would go on to sell 800,000 units, doubling the Saturn's sales of 400,000. Ultimately, the sales gap between the two would only continue to grow, with the PlayStation going on to sell 100 million units and the Sega Saturn selling slightly over 9 million. And by 1998, Sega pulled the Saturn from the US market. 2001 saw the debut of Scrubs on the small screen, The Lord of the Rings on the big screen, and Microsoft to the home console market. The same year that Apple went to market with the iPod, and Angelina Jolie demonstrated a rather unique brand of brotherly love, Microsoft debuted the Xbox. Their home console was a response to the threat that they perceived from Sony's next PlayStation, which Microsoft saw as a competitor to the home PC. Microsoft's new console would run off of a variation of Windows and DirectX technology, and it was powered by an Intel Pentium 3 processor. The console was ahead of its time by including an Ethernet port to support broadband online gameplay, a capability that would be realized on a much wider scale through Xbox Live, which Microsoft launched in 2002. The console would also be the home of a new title from Bungie, Halo Combat Evolved, a game that would go on to be a franchise that would be synonymous with the Xbox. The game's sequel, Halo 2, would be the most successful game on the console, which was due in no small part to the game's online multiplayer component. When the system was released in November of 2001, it came with the price tag of $299, which adjusted to today's money would be approximately $546. In spite of this price tag, the high production cost led to Microsoft actually losing money on the sale of each console, which is a pattern that would hold true for Microsoft for subsequent Xbox consoles as well. And when compared to other 6th generation consoles, the Xbox would outsell Nintendo's GameCube and Sega's Dreamcast, but it would be a distant second place for Xbox, as it would go on to sell 24 million units, where Sony's PlayStation 2 would go on to sell 160 million. Production of the original Xbox would be discontinued in 2005 as Microsoft moved on to the Xbox 360. 2006 marked the return of some recognizable names. Superman, James Bond, and the PlayStation all rolled out their latest entries that year. And while Tom Hanks was busy trying to crack the Da Vinci Code, Sony entered the world of 7th generation consoles with the PS3, a console that they dubbed with the tagline, "It only does everything." Sony had dominated the 6th generation console race, and now they were back again, and this time their system came with a Blu-ray player. After all, this was the era when you had to decide if you were going to back HD DVDs, or Blu-ray, or just wait it out with your tapes and your DVDs. Sony wanted to make that choice easy for you by including their HD format as part of their most recent console.
Dear PlayStation, my grandma won't stop watching Blu-ray movies on my PS3.
In November of 2006, when the PlayStation 3 launched in North America, customers were also given the choice between a 20GB version or, for those who wanted even more storage space, a 60GB version. The 20GB version went for $499 or slightly over $800 today, and the 60GB for $599 or approximately $963.52 adjusted for today. This high price made it the most expensive console of its generation compared to the Xbox 360 and the Nintendo Wii. Furthermore, the Xbox 360 had a jump start on the PS3, having launched the year prior. And as for the Wii, the console had not only revitalized the Nintendo brand, it had also redefined what home console gaming meant with its motion controls. And unfortunately for Sony, for the first time in a long time, they found themselves out of first place in the home console market. And after all,
if you ain't first, you're last.
But Sony took steps to combat this. In 2007, they began to offer a 40GB model of the PS3, and they reduced the price of the 80GB model by $100. They also would go on to release a slim and a super slim model of the PlayStation 3 as well. These course corrections, along with a game catalog that included the likes of The Last of Us, would help the PS3 to be more competitive with the other consoles of its time. However, the runaway hit of the 7th generation console age was the Nintendo Wii, which went on to sell approximately 100 million units, where the PS3 ultimately went on to sell over 87 million. The system was eventually discontinued in North America in 2016 and in Japan the following year, as Sony moved on to the PS4, which had launched in 2013. And, despite it not being number one in its console race, the PS3 went a long way to help cement Sony's Blu-ray as the HD video format.
Look, for $299, you don't just get a sweet gaming machine. It's like you get the best Blu-ray player around built in for free.
And so that rounds out our look at these consoles. And sure, looking at these adjusted prices alone doesn't paint a complete picture of what life was like for the consumer 20, 30, or 40 years ago. But I do hope that dusting off the cobwebs from these memorable consoles helps to put a fresh perspective on them. Until next time, I'm Mike D, and thanks for watching.
Now you may return to the world as you know it. And remember, look for Sega Saturn. It's out there.